In this video, I want to take a detailed look at developers' promises and your returns. In my view, this is a very sensitive topic because it's precisely due to developers' promises that people pay quite a lot of money, yet they get very little in return for it. Let's break down this topic in detail, and by following the link, you can get access to a private knowledge base where I've gathered developers, real cases, profitability, figures, and a lot of other things for you, all packed very concisely. You can quickly read through and familiarize yourself with the necessary materials, getting quite a lot of valuable information about the market, projects, and other nuances. So go ahead and follow the link. If you're planning to buy real estate here and spend your money, this will be extremely useful for you, so I highly recommend it. And we'll start with profitability. Profitability is it's what developers speculate on the most, and it's what they find easiest to do. Why? Because most people have absolutely no understanding of the numbers, they absolutely don't know how to calculate, they're completely unaware of the intricacies of real estate and exactly what value in real estate or what criterion in real estate adds the maximum amount of value to that property. People just don't know all of this. That's why it's very easy to make up profitability figures, and developers do it, well, pretty much all of them. Yes, so those profitability figures that you see are very often completely detached from reality. Let me give you an example. For instance, this building is in a wonderful location. As you can see, there's a beautiful park, the old town, in short, all the beauty. Well, it would seem that the location couldn't possibly be any better. What do we have here? Here, the starting price was $2,000 per square meter in 2018. So it's been about 7 years now. And as of today, it's realistically possible to sell this apartment for somewhere around $2,500 to $2,700. Yes, I know someone will tell me they'll sell it for $3,500. Well, I'd say to that, go ahead and try and see how many years it takes you to pull that off, right? So I'm looking at real figures so that a person could list the apartment and generally sell it within a month. So overall, it's roughly possible to do it for about that much money. And now let's calculate what kind of return a person who got in here 7 years ago would actually get. Well, for example, they entered at a price of $2,000 per square meter. The project took 7 years to build, and that gives us a 5% annual return if they sell at a price of $2,700. But if they didn't get in at the excavation stage, for instance, but joined later, and later the prices were already much higher, say 2 years ago at $3,500, then of course that return ends up being negative. Right? But from my point of view, a 5% annual return is absolutely not the dream, right? It's roughly the level of dollar inflation, and overall it's not bad, but only considering that a huge number of residential complexes here are actually sold at a loss. Yeah. So people buy in and then sell at a loss because they initially pay more than the secondary market price. So in this example, if we could sell this apartment for $3,500, the yield would be around 10% annually. That is if we calculate it over 7 years. Overall, that is already a decent yield, but I will say it again, just try selling it for $3,500. If you manage that, then you have secured a really great yield over 7 years. Well, based on price appreciation, but then again, it is absolutely not an easy task. Let us move on. The next most common promise that almost everyone in this location breaks is, of course, the deadlines. Deadlines are, well, such an endless topic. Basically, nothing stops a developer from delaying a project for, say, 4 or 5 years. There are absolutely no issues with that. And essentially, you cannot really hold them accountable, right? Because you are giving them money under some contract. The contract naturally includes some penalties, but the developer knows that, first of all, most people do not demand that money later for one reason or another, right? Once the project is finished, they are so happy it is actually done that they forget they could even demand any money and so on, right? Then many developers also have contracts drafted in a way that you would really have to struggle to claim or recover that money from them, right? So if a developer, for instance, does not just give you the money, you have to go to court, and many people do not want to go to court. And basically it is a kind of vicious cycle that, let us just say, nobody wants to go through, right? So as a rule, most people just wave it all off and get their property like 8 years later and are just happy they got it at all. Infrastructure is another topic for a huge number of promises. Well, imagine you are a developer, right? And you need to sell for, say, $2,000 per square meter. You sell, and then you have to fulfill your promise. You need to build the infrastructure. But according to the contract, it only states that you must deliver the square meters because almost nobody here naturally includes infrastructure in the contract. There is a small number of developers who, despite the infrastructure not being in the contract, build it anyway. But then again, almost all of them build it in a way that a high-income audience will not go there. Basically, they build this infrastructure just to check a box. It is either a tiny pool, or it all looks ugly, or there is no unified concept, or there are many, many buts. And of course, for you as a consumer who wants to make money, infrastructure built just to check a box does not hold much value, because essentially, if you are attracting a low-income audience, you will not make money on it, right? Or you earn very little. But in the pictures, of course, they show you the most beautiful infrastructure. Naturally, it is the best, it is the most wonderful. But you have to understand the developer's motivation here. It's very simple. To earn a good profit margin, if you built for $2,000 per square and made nominal infrastructure just for show, you earned as much as possible. If you invested fully in infrastructure, you earned very little. Of course, a local developer will choose to earn a lot, just like many others. So you need to find those few who promise and keep their word, meaning they do a great job. Thank God such developers exist, meaning they're appearing in this market, but there are very, very few. They're practically unique cases, but nevertheless, it's already very good, right? So you can enter such projects and get truly great quality infrastructure and everything else. And in this file, I talk about the 7 most popular investment strategies. If you're an investor and looking at different projects, it will be extremely useful for you. Read it, check it out. I think you'll like it. Rental yields. Many developers and sellers also often promise the moon, unrealistic figures, numbers that don't actually exist. Why can they do this and do it successfully? Because they know perfectly well that you won't keep track of the numbers. They know you won't go digging through websites, you won't go looking for real yields, because quite simply, it takes time, it takes energy, it takes your attention to study the market. And as a rule, none of the clients or a very small percentage of people actually do this. So they can paint beautiful figures for you indefinitely, and the market shows and sales practice shows that people believe it, right? And they believe it very successfully and bring in big money. Well, I mean, why not? This whole story is also fueled by, of course, beautiful pictures. When a person sees super beautiful pictures, they imagine the future that will be there, and it seems perfectly logical to them that such a price tag is, well, absolutely justified and grounded. But the reality is a bit different. The reality is that your project takes a long time to build, you get infrastructure that isn't the same quality or look as promised, and overall the project concept ends up much weaker than it might have seemed at the moment you bought this property. Visuals and pictures here are promised by everyone except the lazy, right? That is, practically all developers now have pictures that have reached a more or less decent level. Now, artificial intelligence and other tools are helping them very well with this. But you have to understand one simple thing. A person who pays $200 to $300 a day, and those are exactly the figures many want to see, because with those figures you get a very cool rental yield, and property value is directly linked to rental yield. Meaning if you don't have rental yield, you can also forget about high property value, like some cool appreciation and so on. So a person who pays that kind of money per day is paying for their experience, and that experience is made up of everything. It's the quality of the infrastructure, its design, its location, the location of the property itself, the building's facade, the very concept of the building's layout, right? It's what kind of entertainment there is, how a person gets involved, you know? I mean, what kind of interesting, entertaining stories are there for them in this residential complex? Lots and lots of things. So this inner feeling that people are willing to pay a premium for, it's made up of a huge number of small details. Now, a big mistake people make is when they come to look at a property, they look at just one parameter or a few, like location, for example. Yes, they like the location. They think that because of a good location, people will pay a high price. Of course not. And there are a huge number of such examples. Almost the entire first line yields a return of up to 5% per year. I mean, that's very little, even though it's the first line, you know, it's close to the old town and so on. And if we're talking about yields and major misconceptions, well, one of the biggest misconceptions is the first line. The first line is something that quite a large number of sellers speculate on. Like, you see the sea, it's right there. You see a building on the first line of the sea, it's there too, so it must be expensive. That's almost never the case. I mean, if we take even, I don't know, major cities like Barcelona, for example, a European city, or other cities, you can look into it too. As a rule, in many cities, real estate on the first line is significantly cheaper than real estate located further from the sea. And there are historical reasons for this in different cities, right? But you have to understand one simple thing. A person with money has plenty of this seaside real estate. You won't impress them with the sea at all. So for them, it's not a value. So who is it a value for then? Well, it's a value precisely for those people who haven't seen the sea. But then again, most often these are people who aren't a high-paying audience. I mean, they don't have much money. Yes, for them, the sea is a value. They're happy, they come to the sea. It's important for them to be just a few meters from the sea, right? But they don't pay a lot for it, they pay a low price. And so you can study the first line and see that the yield across almost the entire first line in Batumi, and not just in Batumi, but in many other cities, is up to 5% per year. So that's a fairly low yield, specifically because of the audience that goes there. Of course, if there's a very strong concept project on the first line that's valuable for more than just its location, you'll have a much, well, higher yield because of that. Yes. But as a rule, a developer building a property on the first line doesn't want to invest in a concept project. Why? Because he understands that he can just sell you that first line at a high price anyway. Because he knows there are tons of people who don't understand anything about real estate. The main thing for them is just to show that the complex is on the first line and they don't have to do anything else besides square meters, and people will still buy it at a high price. That's why developers love the first line, because they can sell it as expensively as possible while providing the minimum amount of value. Developers simply love it, and clients love the first line, though they usually have a very poor understanding of real estate and investments. And developers know this too. That's why they build projects on the first line that are conceptually completely uninteresting. Another very important story is, of course, premium class construction. Well, it's a kind of promise, right? That's hard to quantify. Why? Because people most often will perceive it based on their feelings. So what's important to you in the premium class? As an investor, it's important that this premium class is sought after for purchase and rent by a solvent audience, an audience with money. This is extremely important for you. And if this audience gets that wow effect, gets those great feelings, then it's super valuable for you. When developers say, look at the pretty picture, the solvent audience will come here. Why? Because we're showing a pretty picture, but that's not the case. The reality is completely different. In reality, a solvent audience will go for a combination of factors. It's the location, it's a great picture, it's the status, it's the environment, it's many, many, many things. And right here you can watch a video, an example of one of the good projects where a solvent audience actually goes among others. And there are always good prices there, good occupancy around, despite it being 50 kilometers from Batumi. This is another myth for many people, that the closer to the city, the better the yield, the better it rents out, and the whole thing is much safer. That's absolutely not true. Yes, occupancy might be slightly better in the city, but the question is at what price? Yes. I mean, there are a huge number of projects that fill up in the off-season for $20 a day. Well, like, that's a yield that's not even enough for cleaning, let alone your profit as an owner, right? And in the season, it's about $40 to $50 a day. But this yield is just peanuts. Yes, it fills up, but what's the use of that occupancy to you? Two factors are important to you, both occupancy and a good rental price. Only then, only with the combination of these two factors, will you earn well. Watch the video. It will be as useful as possible for you. It's exactly about the good amount of value that a developer should provide. Anyway, as you've realized, there are quite a few nuances, and I recommend you follow the link. There's a whole knowledge base there. I'm collecting it for you and constantly updating it. You can follow the updates. There will be a lot of great, useful information appearing there, including on projects, prices, and those nuances of where not to enter, those nuances where real estate is overpriced, where you could lose money. So that entire database will be gathered there. Over time, I plan to make it quite comprehensive and large here. So if you want to spend your money on properties that will actually make you money, just click the link below and I'll see you in the next videos.